Adobe Fresco is a painting and drawing app that provides a powerful set of creative tools for digital artists. Let's take a quick look at some of the basic features of the app so that you can get started creating your own artwork. We'll begin with the layers over on the right side. The active layer has a thin blue border on the thumbnail. You can change the order of a layer in the Layers panel by pressing down on the layer thumbnail and then dragging it to another location in the layer stack. Tap the Layers button at the top right of the layer taskbar to hide or show the layer stack. Below that are the layer properties where you can name a layer, choose a blend mode, or adjust the opacity of a layer. The plus symbol is the Add Layer button, and this will add a new empty layer above the active layer. The eye icon is the Layer Visibility button. Tap on this to hide or show the active layer. And the three dots opens up the More Options menu with additional layer actions. You can use a standard two-finger gesture to zoom in or zoom out on the image, move it around on screen, or rotate the canvas. You can fit the entire image on screen with a quick two-finger pinch gesture. To view the image with a minimal interface, tap the full screen button in the upper right corner, that's those two arrows, and then tap again to return to the standard view. There's an undo button up in the upper right, and if you press on that, you can see that there's also a redo button there. You can also undo with a two-finger tap on the screen, and you can redo with a three-finger tap. You can see a list of the gestures that you can use with Fresco by tapping on the Help button up in the upper right and choosing View Gestures. Now let's take a quick look at the toolbar. There are three types of brushes in Fresco: the pixel brushes, the live brushes, which include the watercolor and the oil brushes, and the vector brushes. Tap on a tool to choose it, and if you see a small triangle on the tool icon, tap again or long press to show additional options or tools. For example, with the selection tool I've chosen here, it shows the lasso and the selection brush. If it's a brush tool, you'll see a panel showing all of the available brushes for that tool. For example, here in the pixel brushes, I can see the different brush groups. I'm going to come down and choose Painting, and then scroll through these brushes and choose Impressionist. You can tap on the star to add this brush to your favorites. You can also load Photoshop brushes by tapping the plus at the bottom of the brushes panel. And if you've already transferred your brushes to a cloud destination, you can access them by choosing Import from Files. Sometimes it's useful to have the brushes panel be open all of the time so you can easily choose and switch between different brushes. To do this, press and drag on the top of the brushes panel, and you can detach it and position it anywhere on screen. You can also dock it to the side of the toolbar by dragging it over to where it aligns with the edge and letting go. This is a really handy way to work on your project and have access to all of your brushes as you're painting. To undo that, just drag it away and tap the X to close the panel. The tool options can be found docked at the bottom of the toolbar. As with the brushes panel, you can drag on these and position those anywhere on screen that you want, and just drag them back to the bottom of the toolbar to redock them. The small circle on the image in the lower left is the touch shortcut. When you press on this, it modifies the behavior of some of the tools. For instance, with a pixel or a vector brush active, it changes the brush to an eraser, allowing you to erase with all the distinctive edge and texture qualities of the selected brush. As you activate the tool and the touch shortcut, a small blue label will appear in the upper right corner telling you what the touch shortcut is doing. Additionally, you can drag the touch shortcut to position it anywhere on screen that works for how you like to use the app. If you tap on the Help menu, you can choose Touch Shortcuts to see a list of the different touch shortcuts you can use with Fresco. As you work in Fresco, the file is regularly being saved in the background as an Adobe Cloud document. Tapping the Home button in the upper left will close and save the file and return you to the home screen. There's a lot to explore and discover in Adobe Fresco, and we've only just scratched the surface. Now that you're more familiar with the general layout of the app, choose one of the brushes, dip it in some color, and see what you can create. When you launch Adobe Fresco, the first thing that you'll see is the home screen. Here you can create a new drawing or painting from scratch, which is what we'll do in this lesson. You can tap Import and Open to import an image from another location, such as Dropbox, or you can open images that you've recently worked on. Let's go ahead and start a new image by tapping on the Create New button. In this screen, there are a variety of presets that you can choose from, or you can create a custom size. I'm going to tap on Print, and then I'll tap on the little arrow next to the word Poster down here, and I'll choose to switch to a landscape format. Then I'll tap on the poster icon to open up a blank document into Fresco. I'm going to start by going up to the pixel brush, and in the favorites, I'm going to choose the ink stains. Now let me clarify that all of these brushes are found in different pixel brush groups, and I have added them to the favorites in my version of the app. If you're using Fresco for the first time, you won't see any brush favorites here. The ink stains brush can be found in the FX brushes. I'm going to tap on the color chip, and I'm going to use this color wheel here to dial in a bluish green color, something like that. Then I'm just going to paint over the center of the image to add that in there. I'm using a pretty big brush. It's about 1800 pixels. I'll tap on that color chip again, and I'm going to get more of a violet color. We'll add some of that in. Go back to that color chip, and let's get some orange color in there. And then finally, let's come here and get some yellow color to put in there. So just a blend of different colors. All right, that looks good. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the pixel brush again, and I'm going to choose this gritty brush that I had earlier saved to my favorites. I'm not going to actually paint with the gritty brush. I'm going to use it as an eraser. Now, there is an eraser tool in Fresco, but it doesn't really have a lot of character. It just erases. Now, of course, sometimes you need to have that, and it's very useful that it's there. But what I like to do is use a brush and turn it into an eraser. And I can do that by holding down the touch shortcut in the lower left. So when I do that, my brush is going to become an eraser, and I can erase with all the interesting edge characteristics of that brush. So let me just make this brush a little bit bigger. And I'm going to try to use this eraser brush to define the shape of a bottle. Kind of a stylistic, fanciful bottle, but a bottle nonetheless. And we'll come along there. There we go. That looks good. And let me get my brush a lot bigger now. And I can come in and quickly erase all this other stuff along the sides and the top. All right, that looks good. Let me come to the color chip, and I'm going to tap on the white color up here. And I'll lower the opacity to, I don't know, about 40, 50%, something like that. And let me come up to make sure I still have that gritty brush selected. I'm going to lower the size of that down to maybe about 200. And I'm going to double check the smoothing. That's this little curved line here in the bottom of the tool options. I definitely want to have my smoothing turned up because I'm going to draw a curved line. And what I'm going to do is just draw a line that comes down and follows the edge of the bottle, just to suggest a little bit of a highlight there. Next, it's time to add a new layer. So I'll tap on the Add Layer button over here. In the Layer taskbar, I'll get to my color chip, and I'll tap on the Recent Swatch for that blue-green color that I used earlier. I'll come up to the pixel brushes, and I'll choose the Conte Crayon brush, which is one of the dry media brushes. And let me lower the size down a little bit to maybe about 280. And what I'm going to do is just draw a squiggly line there across the bottom of the bottle. I'll tap on that color chip again and come and get an orange-red color. Make my brush size a little bit larger here. And I'm just going to draw an arc shape, just like that, just to suggest maybe a sun over the mountains. All right, let's add another layer. I'll come back up to the pixel brushes, and I'm going to get the pastel square brush, which can be found in the dry media brushes. And with the pastel square brush, what I'm going to do is draw a mountain shape. And I'll press down on the touch shortcut in the lower left to erase the mountain where it's over the bottle, just to suggest that the mountain is in the background. And on that same layer, let me tap the color chip and make that orange color a little bit more yellow. And let's come up and get a different brush. And I'll choose this Cezanne 1 brush, which is from the painting group of brushes. And I'll paint a simple circular shape to suggest the sun up in the sky. One of the nice things about Fresco is that you don't have to worry about saving your drawings or paintings as you're creating them. Your work is automatically saved at regular intervals as a cloud document. There are a lot of possibilities for drawing and painting in Adobe Fresco. Start exploring with the different brushes and tools and have fun following the creative pathways that you discover. Some of the coolest features in Adobe Fresco are the groundbreaking live brushes that emulate not just the look, but also the behavior and the paint mixing qualities of watercolors and oil paints. Let's explore some of the ways that the oil painting engine in Fresco creates realistic oil brushstrokes with colors that blend together like actual oil paints. The oil brushes are found in the live brushes, which is the second brush tool in the toolbar. Down at the bottom of the toolbar, you can find the options for those brushes. You have an option to change the size of the brush. Then there's the flow setting, and perhaps the best way to explain what flow does is that it controls how much paint is loaded onto the brush. And to give you an idea what that looks like, I have a layer here that I've already prepared using two different flow settings. So the blue brushstroke on the left was made with a flow setting of 10, and the brushstroke on the right was made with a flow setting of 50. So you can see how those differences have affected the characteristics of each stroke, as well as how much paint was put down on the canvas. Let me just tap on the visibility icon to turn that layer off. And let's go down to the brush settings now. There's a variety of different settings here you can experiment with and see what they do. One thing to take note of is the pressure dynamic setting, which will control how the Apple Pencil interacts with the iPad when you're using that. So you can have the size and the flow moderated by how much pressure you're using with the Apple Pencil on the iPad. Down at the bottom there is an interesting setting for reload color. And what reload color does is it controls whether the color is reloaded onto the brush for each new stroke. You'll only notice a difference with the reload color setting when you're adding a new color onto existing oil paint and the paint mix option is being used. And speaking of paint mix, let's take a look at that next. Before I do that, I'm going to go tap on the color chip and I'm going to choose a different color, and I'll make the duplicate surfer layer active. So as the name suggests, the paint mix setting controls how new color mixes and blends with existing color. So let's start out with this set to 0, and I'm going to zoom in so we can see this a little bit better here, and I'll draw a stroke here over the water and up into the sky. And now let's just sort of set this up a little bit higher, maybe about 25, and let's do another stroke. So with higher paint mix values, the new color is more prominent at the very start of the brushstroke, and then it fades as it mixes with the wet oil colors on the canvas, and the brush picks up more of the existing color that's there. And this is possible because in Fresco, the oil paints never dry. They are always wet, which allows you a lot of flexibility that you don't have with real oil paints. I'm going to do a 2-finger tap on the screen a couple times just to undo those, and then a quick pinch gesture to fit the image on screen. And now that we've had a quick peek under the hood at some of the settings for the oil paints, let's add some finishing touches to the surfer painting. I already have a layer that I prepared that has some small brush strokes on it to suggest reflected sunset colors on the water. Now, in order to blend this with the main surfer painting layer underneath it, I'm going to tap on the More Options button in the layer taskbar, and I'll choose Merge Down. Next, I'm going to come to the oil brush panel, and I'm going to go to my favorites and choose this detail brush. And for blending the highlight color into the water, let me share a really cool trick with you. I'll tap on the color chip, and I'm going to lower the opacity to 0%. And what this is going to allow me to do is blend this existing color together without adding any new color. And that is such a cool technique because Sometimes that's exactly what you want to do, is you want to be able to blend the colors that are already there on your canvas or on a layer without adding a new color. The oil paints in Fresco that never dry and that mix and blend together like real oil paints are a wonderful creative tool for digital artists. Plus, they're a lot of fun to play with too. The watercolor brushes in Adobe Fresco provide incredibly realistic brush and wet color results that do an amazing job of mimicking all of the blending subtleties of the watercolor medium. Let's check out some of the important settings and brush characteristics so you can get started creating your own watercolor paintings. Tap on the live brushes in the toolbar to access the watercolor brushes. I'm just going to leave this set to the watercolor round detail brush. The tool options for the watercolor brushes can be found down at the bottom of the toolbar. There's the usual brush size option. Below that is flow, which controls how much paint is on the brush and influences the intensity and the translucency of the color that you apply. So in order to explore that, let me just do a long press on the woman's hair to sample some of that color with the eyedropper. And I will set the flow down fairly low, maybe to about 20. And let's use a larger brush here. I'm going to zoom up so we can see what's going on. And I'll add a few brush strokes on her hair using that low flow setting, so you can see what the result is there. Next, I'm going to turn the flow setting up higher. Maybe I'll go up to about 55. And we'll add some more brush strokes, and you can see the difference. You can see how the color intensity is much more pronounced with that higher flow value there. Next, we have one of the most interesting settings in Adobe Fresco, and that is the water flow setting. That's these two little droplets here. Water flow determines how wet the brush is. Of course, with watercolor painting, you dip the brush in water and then dip it in paint, and the more water that is on the brush is going to influence how the colors spread out on the paper and blend and bleed with other colors. So in order to explore that, let me tap on the color chip and get a different color here. I'll choose this blue from my recent color swatches. And I'm going to leave the water flow set to maybe about 15 here. And let's zoom up to an area where we have some empty canvas to play with. I'm just going to draw a brush stroke here. Next, I'm going to tap on the color chip and get a different color so that we can really see the difference here. I'm going to leave the water flow set to 15, and what I'm going to do is add another brush stroke that slightly overlaps with the first one so we can see how that is blending. So a little bit of blending, but not too much. I'll tap on water flow again, and let's just raise this up fairly high, maybe up to about 70. And let's bring in another brush stroke and see how that is blending with the blue color there. So you can see there's a lot more obvious blending, a lot more naturalistic blending, as if that blue color is bleeding out into that yellow stroke there. So really an interesting quality of the watercolor brushes in Adobe Fresco. I'm going to do a 2-finger tap on the screen a few times just to undo those, and I'll do a pinch gesture to fit the image on screen. Down at the bottom of the tool options, we have the brush settings with controls for things such as angle, spacing, and scatter, as well as shape, pressure, and velocity dynamics. If you're familiar working with the brush settings in Adobe Photoshop, many of these settings may be familiar. One of the really interesting things about the watercolors in Fresco is that they stay wet. They do not dry out. You can always go back and blend them with new watercolors or even with just water. So to do that, I'll tap on the water flow. I'll make sure that that's set up fairly high there. And then I'm going to tap on the color chip, and I'm going to lower the opacity to 0. So with 0% opacity on the color and a high water flow setting, I'll tap on the layer for the woman's face, and now I can just paint with water. Like I've just cleaned my brush and dipped it in water, and now I'm just adding water to the color that is already on the paper, and it creates this really magical blend. I just love watching this in Fresco. It really is one of the most amazing things about the program. The other thing to know about is that if you did want to dry out the layer of watercolor, there's an option for that. If you tap on the More Options button in the Layer taskbar, down at the bottom you'll see an option for Dry Layer. As you can see, the watercolor live brushes in Adobe Fresco offer quite a lot of interesting color blending possibilities for creative and expressive painting technique. Layers and layer masks are very useful when creating an illustration in Adobe Fresco, because parts of a drawing can be organized on separate layers for greater flexibility. This makes it very easy to modify the different components of your drawing. In this illustration, there are 4 layers for the astronaut. We have the color layer and the ink outlines layer, and also layers for the reflections on the helmet and the tether. I want to scale and rotate the astronaut, so I need to put these 4 layers into a layer group so I can transform them at the same time. To create a layer group, I'm going to take the thumbnail for the ink outlines layer and drag it onto the color layer, and you can see how that's created a layer group. Next, I'll add in the helmet reflections layer and the tether layer. To see the contents of a layer group, just double tap on its thumbnail, and you can work with the layers there if you need to. To return to the view of the main layer stack, just tap the little back button at the top of the layer group. So with the astronaut layer group selected, I'm going to come over to the toolbar and select the Move and Transform tool so I can transform all these layers in the group. And I just want to scale this a little bit smaller, so I'll use a 2-finger gesture to do that and maybe rotate it a little bit. I could use the handle at the bottom to rotate, and of course I could also use the corner handles if I wanted to scale this proportionally as well. Alright, that looks pretty good. One other thing to draw your attention to is the flip horizontal and flip vertical buttons up in the upper right. I'll tap Done here. And next what I want to do is work with the small moon in the lower right. This moon is part of a layer that has several different elements on it, so let me make that layer active and tap on the Layer Visibility button a couple times so you can see what's on that layer. What I want to do is move the moon up to its own layer so I can work with it separately. So to do that, I'm going to come to the toolbar and select the Lasso tool, and I'll draw a lasso selection around the moon. When there's an active selection, the Selection Actions bar will appear at the bottom of the interface, offering different options for working with a selection. To move the selected item up to a new layer, I'm going to go over to the Layer taskbar on the right side and tap on the More Options button, that's the 3 dots here, and I'm going to choose Cut Selection. Next, I'll go back to that same menu, and I'll choose Paste Selection. This creates a new layer for the moon, and it takes me into the transform mode in case I want to apply any transformations. And in this case, I do. I'm just going to scale this up a little bit larger and move it right about there. All right, that looks good. I'll tap Done. One of the essential features for working with layers is controlling the visibility of parts of a layer through the use of a layer mask. On the layer with the several planets and moons, I want to remove this small moon on the far right edge, but I don't want to totally delete it in case I change my mind later. So I'll conceal it with a layer mask. In the Layer taskbar, I'll tap on the More Options button, and I'll choose Create Empty Mask. Now when you add a layer mask in Fresco, it creates a new thumbnail for that layer mask, and there's a little black dot on the left side of that thumbnail. So this indicates that I'm viewing the thumbnail for the layer mask, and the layer mask is active. If I swipe on the layer mask thumbnail, I can see the thumbnail for the actual layer, and the black dot moves over to the right side, which means that the layer is active. I want to work on the mask, so I'll swipe back so I'm viewing the layer mask. With the layer mask active, the Layer taskbar on the right side becomes the Active Mask taskbar, and there are options here for working with a layer mask. Down at the bottom of the interface are 2 buttons for Reveal and Hide, and these are used when you want to paint with a brush on the layer mask to hide or reveal the elements on the mask layer. I already have a pixel brush selected in the toolbar, and the Hide button is enabled. I'll tap on the More Options button in the Active Mask taskbar over on the right side, and I'll make sure that the On Layers view is selected. This controls whether I see the effects of what the layer mask is hiding or revealing on the layer, or whether the mask is visible as a red overlay. So all I have to do is come here and paint over that moon on the right edge, and I can hide it. And you can see the black area on the thumbnail of the layer mask that indicates where I just painted on the mask to hide that moon. If I tap on Reveal, I can paint over that moon again and bring it back. And that really is the beauty of working with layer masks, is the ability to conceal parts of a layer without actually deleting the content. Adobe Fresco offers many features for using layers, selections, and layer masks to create illustrations that are easy to edit and modify.